Okay, tonight we're going to be doing Surah 65, entitled The Divorce in the Quran, the Arabic Quran. It's called Al Talaq. You might have heard of triple talaq, and this is something that was very controversial within India because the Indian Supreme Court outlawed triple talaq, whereby a Muslim man, an Indian Muslim man, would just say, I divorce you 3 times. It didn't even have to be to his wife in person. He could send it via text or some sort of messaging app. Just say or write, I divorce you 3 times. And that would essentially terminate the marriage under Islamic law. And the Indian Supreme Court said that this was not a valid method of divorce. And of course, the Muslim community in India was enraged, and there were protests. There were people, and of course, there were non Muslim leftists who tried to defend one of the many barbaric practices, one of the many inhumane barbaric practices of Islam, by saying that they were discriminating against Muslims, or this was a cultural practice, a cultural norm. It's the same justification used for female genital mutilation, clitoridectomies, and infibulation, destroying the bodily integrity of women and girls. And this is something that happens to millions and millions of Muslim women and young girls throughout the world, even in civilized countries where you have a large Muslim population, like the United States or Canada. Hi, Miss Bluebird. So something else that's very common in Muslim areas is this form of divorce, particularly in India, the idea of triple talaq. So this is entitled talaq, or divorce, and it explains the grounds for a proper Sharia compliant Muslim divorce. And I'll show you how it doesn't line up with scripture, and how, once again, Muhammad is illustrating through his own actions how Islam is not really a God-given religion. IGW, rather, it's just a set of rules that he came up with and try to enforce in order to accrue power. And you can you can just begin by looking at the first verse. It says, O prophet, when you divorce women, divorce them for their prescribed time, and calculate the number of the days prescribed, and be careful of your duty to Allah your Lord. Do not drive them out of their houses, nor should they themselves go forth, unless they commit an open indecency. And indecency is not defined, but in the Old Testament, when the equivalent would have been committing fornication or adultery, something along those lines. But in Islam, anything that shames Muslim men is considered grounds for honor killing, and that's why you have so many honor killings within Islam. Women who dress, who don't wear a niqab, who show their arms, or who listen to Western music, or who play soccer. There was a story recently about the new Sudanese government allowing women to participate in soccer tournaments and soccer matches, and the backlash this is occasioning from the Islamist supporters, the ones who have kind of been sidelined ever since Omar al-Bashir was deposed. And now you have an interim military civilian governing council, which has relaxed some of the Sharia that had been imposed over the past several decades. So you have women playing soccer. So this is something that would be considered an indecency, or 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 going out, or mixing with male non relatives. So going out and hanging out with a group of friends who were boys from your school. If you were a Muslim girl, that would be considered an indecency. So any acting like a normal Western teenager, or a non-Muslim teenager, would be considered an indecency, and that's why you have honor killings like the one in Texas, where the two teenage girls were murdered and their father absconded and is a fugitive now, living somewhere in Egypt. So that's one thing. It's not defined what an open indecency is, but an indecency in Islam is very different from the grounds for the divorce that were enumerated in the Old Testament, in the Mosaic Law. Even though those two, and I'll get to this, even though those two um, were wrong in the way that they were applied, particularly by the Pharisees and the ruling authorities of the time. So whoever no indecency, and these are the limits of Allah, and whoever goes down beyond the limits of Allah, he indeed does injustice to his own soul. You do not know that Allah may, after that, bring about reunion. So when they have reached their prescribed time, then retain them with kindness, or separate them with kindness, and call to witness two men of justice from among you, and give upright testimony for Allah. With that is admonished he who believes Allah in the latter day, and whoever is careful of his duty to Allah, he will make for him an outlet. And of course, um, you need two men to testify, because a woman's testimony is virtually worthless in Islamic society. According to the Quran, a woman's testimony is, or the testimony of two women is the equivalent value of one man's testimony. So that's why you need two men. And give him sustenance from whence he thinks not, and whoever trusts in Allah, he is sufficient for him. Surely Allah attains his purpose. Allah indeed has appointed a measure for everything. Now, contrast this with the rules for divorce that Christ enumerated in the Gospels. So in Matthew 19, he confronts the Pharisees, or rather, the Pharisees confront him, and this is his response. The Pharisees also came unto him, tempting him, and saying unto him, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? And this was something that was common, just divorcing your wife for groundless reasons, and throwing her into poverty. And he answered and said unto them, have you not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? And he said, for this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. They say unto him, why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement, and to put her away? He saith unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, suffered you to put away your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say unto you, whoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whoso marrieth her which is put away doth commit adultery. So Christ is enumerating the reasons, or the grounds for divorce, and he's explaining the pattern of one man and one woman. And if you go back to Genesis, the first person to take multiple wives was Lamech, which is kind of a pattern for kind of a type of Mohammed and carnality, this idea that you should have plural marriage, because he's not just a polygamist, but he's also a murderer. Uh, Lamech says if Cain was avenged for killing Abel, you know, um, then I'll be avenged more than sevenfold for what I did. Let me just go there. Where and Lamech said unto his wives, and this is in Genesis 4:23. Ada and Zillah, hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech. Hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. So this was the first person to commit polygamy. And if you look at it from that perspective, you understand why this is not something that should be emulated. A lot of Muslims point to the fact that there were patriarchs in the Bible that had multiple wives and had concubines, and tried to frame it as an acceptable thing because this happened in the Bible. But a lot of things, I mean, in the book of Judges, you have people murdering, just committing ghastly atrocities throughout the entire book. But that's not an endorsement of murder and rape and idolatry. So in verse 4, it says, and as for those of you, your women who have despaired of menstruation, if you have a doubt, that prescribed time shall be 3 months. And if those two have not had their courses, and as for the pregnant women, their prescribed time is that they lay down their burden. And whoever is careful of his duty to Allah, he will make easy for him his affair. And of course, Muhammad is not an OBGYN, but he was someone who was betrothed to a girl when he was in his 50s, I believe, and 54. I could be mistaken, but around that age, according to Islamic tradition, he had a 6-year-old bride, and he consummated the marriage when she was 3 years older. And you have Muslims, and Ali Dawah specifically has said this in Speaker's Corner. You'll have Muslims defend marriages based on whether the girl is pubescent. So, in other words, child marriages, something that the entire world outside of the Islamic portion of it has rejected and considers rape and a crime. Uh, Muhammad endorsed because he actually committed that. And there are, like I said, Ali Dawah, there's a group of Muslim apologists that will actually defend this. There are others who will try to dissimulate and change the topic or claim that this was common for that era, or alternatively, that she really wasn't 9 years old, even though this is what Islamic sources themselves say. Uh, that Aisha was 6 years old when Muhammad married her, or when she was given to Muhammad in marriage. In 5, it says, that is the command of Allah, which he has revealed to you, and whoever is careful of his duty to Allah, he will remove from him his evil and give him a big reward. And Muhammad is all about getting rewards for doing particular behaviors that are in conformity with what Muhammad says. So in 6, it says, lodge them where you lodge according to your means, and do not injure them, in order that you may straighten them. And if they are pregnant, spend on them until they lay down their burden. Then if they suckle for you, give them their recompense, and enjoin one another among you to do good. And if you disagree, another woman shall suckle for him. And this is um, this is one of the weirdest. Well, here he's referring to um, wet nurses, but is this is another illustration of the weird inverted values of Islam, and this is described in Sahih Muslim 83425, where you had a man who was unrelated to a woman, and in order for him to remain in her family's home, she had to suckle him, even though he was a grown adult. And this was satirized in Islamicized Me, but this is something that Muslims actually believe. Um, and in fact, if you would describe it, it's a woman had to be veiled in order not to be seen by other men who were non-familial, who weren't related to her by blood. And the only way she could avoid not being veiled in front of him was to breastfeed that stranger, that male stranger. And it just illustrates how bizarre Islam is. But that's not even the well, it's strange. That's the strangest in terms of a practical application. But in terms of theology and world building, it actually does get weirder as you go further along in this surah. But let's continue in verse 7. It says, "Let him who has abundance spend out of his abundance, and whoever has his means of subsistence straighten to him. Let him spend out of that which Allah has given him. Allah does not lay on any soul a burden except to the extent to which he has granted it." Allah brings about ease after difficulty, and how many a town which rebelled against the commandment of its Lord and his apostles, so we called it to account severely, and we chastised it with a stern chastisement. Here he's referring to their attacks on specifically pagan Arab tribes that they were warring with, his own tribe, among them, the Quraysh, but also Jewish tribes like the Banu Nadir and the Banu Qurayza, as well as Christians, although to a lesser degree in that case. Uh, and 9, it says, "So it tasted the evil result of its conduct, and the end of its affair was perdition. Allah has prepared for them severe chastisement. Therefore, be careful of your duty to Allah, O men of understanding who believe. Allah has indeed revealed to you a reminder." And Muhammad is continually reinforcing this idea that he was sent there by God, that he's an apostle or a prophet of God, not only an apostle, but the seal of the apostles. So he was sent there to um, proclaim God, Allah's final word, and he's simply reinforcing the messages of all previous apostles. Now, Muslims aren't able to explain how that's the case if what Muhammad said contradicts what all of the apostles said, what Paul said and Peter said, and Matthew, and previous to that, John the Baptist and Jesus Christ himself, and all of the Old Testament uh, Old Testament prophets. And I think the apostate prophet made a good video about this once, where he pointed out the fact that you have prophets, quote unquote, in the Quran who are taken from scripture, who are taken from the Old Testament, particularly I think Yahya, the John the Baptist was one he focused on, but basically named after whose name means Yahweh is my salvation. Now, why would you have, if these people were Muslims, why would they be named Yahweh is my salvation? Why wouldn't they be called Allah is my salvation? Why wouldn't they be, if these people are actually prophets, and in the Bible John the Baptist was um um uh, uh and Zacharias, I think, let me see. Let me see what the Muslim equivalent of that is. Yeah, Zechariah. So you have these people that are who are named in honor of Yahweh, or who are named by people looking to Yahweh. Um, Jesus, for example, and yet you claim that they're Muslims. Like, why? Why would they be named in and why would they be named s- after something that is not God? So if Yahweh is not God, then why do you have these figures, these prophetic figures in the Quran that are that are named after that are named in anticipation of Yahweh saving us? It doesn't make any sense. But that's a bit of a tangent. So in uh, yeah. Um, so in verse 11 it says, "An apostle who recites to you the clear communications of Allah, so that he may bring forth those who believe and do good deeds from darkness to light. And whoever believes in Allah and does good deeds, he will cause him to enter gardens beneath which rivers flow, to abide therein forever. Allah has indeed given him a goodly sustenance." And I already explained in previous videos how the soteriology of Islam is completely flawed. It's this works-based soteriology where you just keep doing things over and over again, and there's no real eternal security. It tells you that you need to have faith in Allah, but you also need to do good works. But the faith part is negated by the works part, because in Islam it's never specified exactly what the degree of works you have to do in order to enter paradise. So you could be a Muslim and abide by the five pillars of the faith and the six articles, and even follow Muhammad studiously, follow everything you read in the Quran and the Hadith and the tafsirs, and you could still go to hell. There's no guarantee. That's why Muslims, many of them, are eager to engage in martyrdom operations, because the only people guaranteed paradise, aside from Muhammad's companions, his 10 associates, the only people guaranteed paradise other than those people are jihadists who kill themselves. And in fact, Muhammad says he wished he could go and kill himself over and over and over again. So in well, something else that's odd about this, it says it, and this is recurs throughout the Quran, this idea that he gives you clear communications of Allah, and it's not really clear if the meaning is obscured. So I pointed this out in a recent video, the idea that there's at least a quarter of the Quran that's not really intelligible. When Muslims say you're taking a verse out of the Quran from the Quran out of context, they're I think they're missing the point, which is that the Quran has no context. The surahs are arranged; they're not arranged in chronological order. They're not arranged in order of significance, or or surahs that are abrogated to surahs that are not abrogated. They're simply arranged from long to short. There's no context. You have the Muhammad beginning a thought and then veering completely off subject, and attaching another completely unrelated thought to that, and then a chapter ending. Oh, hi Sonia, it's good to see you. So there really isn't any context. So if a quarter of the Quran is unintelligible, and this is, I'm not even saying without looking at the hadiths, if even with the hadith, even with the complementary material which explains the context of certain verses, even with that, there's still a huge part of the Quran that's not intelligible. So these communications, it, either they were completely um, corrupted, like a game of telephone through the years, and they originally were clear. But if that's the case, then what's the point of reading the Quran or trying to claim that it's it's uncorrupted, that it's been handed down uh, in some sort of inviolable way from the 7th century. What's the point of claiming that if you can't understand it now? But there's also the possibility that it wasn't understood then, which is just as likely. And the fact that all of the extant copies of the Quran were burned by the Caliph Umar, we don't know what the actual Quran looks like. So to say that it's perfect or that it hasn't been changed or altered since its inception is simply kind of absurd. But the last verse is where of this surah is where it gets really interesting. Allah is he who created 7 heavens and of the earth the like of them. The decree continues to descend among them, that you may know that Allah has power over all things, and that Allah indeed encompasses all things in his knowledge. Parentheses. So what this is saying is that there are 7 heavens, but not only are there 7 heavens, there are 7 earths. When he says, and of the earth, the like of them, he's basically saying there are 7 earths. And you have to consider the fact that Muhammad did not believe in, um, he didn't understand that the earth was an oblate spheroid. He thought the earth was flat. He didn't understand the relationship of satellites to planets. He saw an eclipse and he thought the apocalypse was beginning, that was going to usher in Armageddon. So he didn't really have a firm grasp of astronomy or any other science for that matter. So when he says here the earth, the like of them, he's not using some sort of metaphorical expression, and you can you can see this because in all of the major Muslim texts that explain this, whether it's Al-Tirmidhi, Al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, all of them explain Muhammad is speaking literally. Like he believed there were seven Earths, 7 actual planets like that, like the Earth, and it reminds you that Islam is a lot farther away from Christianity or from a monotheistic religion than um, than its defenders like to claim or imply or just outright state that it is part of. It shares some sort of Judeo-Christian heritage with the um, other two monotheistic religions, and it's a lot closer to something like Mormonism or Scientology, uh, especially when you get go back to the roots of Islam and the cosmology of Islam. And this is where Islam gets very bizarre. When you try to dig into the cosmology, you don't get a good sense of it. You come across verses like this in the Quran, but you don't really get an in-depth sense of what it what it is. But it, if you go to Surah 21, let me see if I can find it. Find the specific verse. 21, 87. Where it talks about the prophets, the Surah of the prophets, and one of the prophets he mentions is Yunus, which is by translation, Yunus is Jonah. So, and in verse 87, he says, "And Yunus, when he went away in wrath, so he thought that we would not straighten him. So we called out among afflictions, there is no God but thou. Glory be to thee. Surely I am of those who make themselves to suffer loss. So he mentions Eunice, and in relation to Eunice, he he um, he mentions Nun, which is a reference to the whale, or the fish um, uh, that swallowed Jonah. And in Islam, Nun, or Bahamut, it's a whale or a giant sea serpent, and you find it in Tafsir ibn Kathir and Al-Tabari and other Muslim sources and exposition of what this is. But basically, it's a, and I'm probably going to get this wrong, the order, but it's basically the planet which rests on the back of I think an ox, or oxen, and the oxen rest on a, a disc which rests on a whale that holds up the entire planet. So uh, it's literally, you, there was a famous exchange between, I think it was, I forget if it was George Bernard Shaw, but a famous lecturer who was an atheist, a writer, and he got into this conversation with a woman who said, he tried to ask her what her theory of what her theory of life was, and the the upshot is, eventually she says, "Oh, the planet rests on a turtle," and he says, what does the turtle rest on?" And she goes, "It's turtles all the way down." And this is a famous line, but basically what um, basically what Muhammad what Islamic cosmology believes is that there is an ox, I think, on a disc on top of a whale, basically holding up the earth. Like I said, I probably got the order wrong, but something like that. Like that's the Islamic cosmology in relation to the planet. Yeah, the turtle. It's really funny. There's the Dark Tower. There was a s- series of fantasy books by Stephen King where he described, and these things called Guardians of the Beam. So you had Shardik, which was, I think, named after a character in a a character in Watership Down, and who was a bear, like an electronic bear. And you had I forget if it was a turtle or if it was some sort of reptile, like holding up the planet. Anyway, that is the strange ending of Surah 55, which is ostensibly about divorce, but that's how it ends. And Surah 66, the prohibition, is next. Like I said, we're not really speeding through this, but there's only about like 53 or 54 pages left, and I will do that in my next video. And thanks everyone for joining me on a Saturday night, and I'll see you next time.